Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So I've been on a history binge for the past like well, my whole life. But anyway, so I stumbled across this video here, which is ranking the 15 greatest Islamic empires, El Makadima, and I went to watch it. I was like, I can make this into a video probably for the channel. And if you watching this video here, like comment who you think is gonna be number one. Um, and we'll see you there. The video will be obviously in 2 times speed because why not?
One of the most requested videos on this channel
Um,
is one that ranks different Islamic empires. Apparently,
and
people love
we'll go
comparing
from there.
historical figures and entities, so in this video, I'm going to rank
So
15 of the greatest Islamic empires of all time.
hold
I'm
on.
going to use a criteria which takes into
Okay,
account the
cool.
following
So
four
yeah, here.
parameters.
So uh, I'll let people
First,
see
how
the
long the empire
criteria
existed for
here.
as an independent polity.
And
Second,
then
how much
you
area it
can
controlled at its peak.
you can
Third,
decide who
how
you think is
stable
going
was
to
the
be number
empire.
one.
This is a rough estimation of time it spent as a stable empire without civil wars or interregnums before it declined. Fourth, and the final one, is how much cultural influence it has had on the modern Islamic world.
Okay, so this is the criteria: longevity, territory, stability, influence. And okay. So obviously, the Rashidun Caliphate, right? Khalifa Rashidun, they should be number one, but because of the caveats listed, the criteria listed here, they most likely won't be number one. The Ottomans will probably be number one. Um, I'm gonna go Ottomans one. Uh, Probably the Umayyad Caliphate. Um, One of them, because a lot of historians like divide the Umayyads into several different caliphates. Um, they'll be there for sure. Um, and then okay, so the Ayyubid Caliphate or whatever will be here as well. I'm for sure of that. Who else is gonna be here? Let's see. So let's see. I would say the Umayyads will be here, obviously. The Abbasids, the Ottomans, the Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt. Um, Salahuddin Al Ayyubi. I guess the Ayyubid Caliphate. I don't know if I mentioned that before. The Mughal Empire in India. There's a Persian Empire that like had like the like I believe they're the first Muslims to introduce gunpowder to the Islamic world, so they probably will be there just for the influence because the gunpowder Muslim world or the giving a gunpowder to the Muslim world that led to the Ottomans being able to take over Constantinople in 1400s. So um yeah, they should be there before the Abbasids obviously will be here. And then I guess we'll see who else. But I the Rashidun Caliphate should be number one because I feel like they are the most influential caliphate ever. Um, and just the overall, I mean, it's the Hadith. The best after me are my the Sahabas, and then the Tabi'in. So they should be number one. But I feel like because of the criteria here, they'll have like them not number one, maybe three or four, because of that. So yeah,
This one is
but I
kind
do
of
believe the
arbitrary and
Ottomans will be
based
number
purely
one.
on my
So
opinion of the impact that any particular empire had on the Islamic world. These
okay.
parameters are added and a total score is compiled. So if you don't like my picks, don't be mad at me, be mad at math. This video is brought to you by, well, you guys. Thanks to my patrons for supporting the channel and making these videos possible. Al-Muqaddimah is funded only by Patreon, and as you can see, the videos take a long time to research, edit, and produce. And it's only because of my patrons that I am able to put this kind of time into these videos and keep them free from any kind of paywall. So if you want to pledge $1 or more to support the channel, you can head over to my Patreon. Link is in the description. You can also become a member right here on YouTube. There's some cool stuff that comes with it. Back to the video. At number 15 is the Ayyubid Sultanate. They had one of the most famous
Hey, look
Muslim
at
rulers
that!
of all time, the
Look
great
at that!
Salahuddin
Yes,
Ayyubi,
sir.
known in the
Salahuddin Al Ayyubi. I'm
West as Saladin, who
I
conquered
got one of
Jerusalem.
them. All right.
However, that's pretty much all they had, and immediately after him, his sons started to squabble, and the Sultanate began to decline. They were active for around 86 years, and at their peak in 1193, they controlled around 2 million square kilometers. They get only 25 stability points and only 50 cultural points. Other than Saladin being mentioned every single time something happens between Palestine and Israel, they didn't really leave much of a cultural legacy. Then we have the Samanid Emirate. They were an Abbasid successor state and sort of a return to form for Persia, because they started to bring back the original Persian culture from before the Arab conquests. They were active for only about 99 years, but at their peak in 928, they controlled around 2.85 million square kilometers. They get around 70 stability points and around 60 cultural points because they ushered in the so-called Persian Renaissance or Persian Revival. Now, there are 3 Umayyad caliphates on this list. Number 13 is the earliest of them, the Sufyanid
Yeah,
branch
there
of
we
the
go.
Umayyad
Because
dynasty.
they
They came to power after the
often switch like the Umayyads into like the Umayyads with Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. and then it ends with a Yazid, um, because everyone hates Yazid. He's like it's it's crazy. Yazid is like the Yazid is crazy because like the Sunnis, the Shiites, the Sufis, the any anything, anything. They're like, yeah, we don't like him as a collective. Like, you know how bad you have to be
The
anyway.
assassination of Ali, the Prophet's cousin and son-in-law, in 661, and the first Caliph Muawiyah was an incredibly gifted ruler who didn't rule much, but rather kept this diverse and volatile empire together, and at the peak of his power, he controlled some 5 million square kilometers. But overall, the caliphate lasted only 23 years, out of which around 20 were fairly stable, thanks to Muawiyah's brilliance. However, his son and successor Yazid brutally killed the Prophet's beloved grandson Hussein, and so Yazid is the most hated figure in the history of Islam. So
Hmm.
for that, this dynasty gets negative 20 cultural points, only because people would be mad if I didn't do that. At number 12, we have the Almohad Caliphate, which ruled over Morocco and Spain. It was active for some
That's what I
148
forgot
years,
about.
and
Yeah.
at its height in
Um.
1199, it controlled around 2.3 million square kilometers. It was a fairly stable dynasty because of the way that the caliphs distributed land among their sons. It gets only 50 cultural points because it is still pretty relevant in Morocco. Also, because it had my absolute favorite commander of all time, Abu Yaqub al-Mansur. Abu Yaqub al-Mansur was actually able to halt and even push back the Reconquista before his death. Given the circumstances, this was no easy feat. At the 11th place, we have the Umayyad Emirate and later Caliphate of Cordoba. When the Umayyad Caliphate of Damascus fell, one of their princes formed an independent emirate in Spain, which existed for an impressive 277 years. The emirate
This is
later
the
became Caliphate
maze
under the reign
that
of Marwan
happened
III.
right after
At its
also
peak in
the
1996, it controlled the smallest area of any
Abbasids,
of the empires on this list,
and then
only
that took me over
600,000
here
square
obviously.
kilometers. But it was very stable and gets 70 cultural points because almost everything that went from the Islamic world into Europe before the year 1000 went through them, which is a lot. At number 10, we have the Greater Seljuk Empire. They were a Central Asian tribe that went on to rule the
Yes, the
heartland of the
Seljuks
Islamic world.
obviously will
Then
be
they
there.
defeated the Byzantine Empire in Manzikert and
Seljuks
opened the road
were
to Mongolia and eventually Europe.
the Seljuks were Asians, and they came from somewhere up in this area right here, which you probably can see somewhere up in this area right here. And they were this Asian like tribe, I guess. That came and then they had a lasting influence. They're the Seljuk Turks. And then obviously the Seljuk Turks would become the Ottomans. And then the Ottomans obviously Turkey because of the Turks. So all of it like ties into one another.
They ruled for some 116 years, and at their peak in 1092, they controlled almost 4 million square kilometers. They get 60 cultural points because they brought many Central Asian tribes into the Middle East and Anatolia, including the one that later spawned the Great Ottoman Empire. In 1260, the newly founded Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt did something no one thought possible. They defeated the Mongols in the Battle of Enjalut. The Mamluks were slave soldiers who overthrew the Ayyubids and founded their independent sultanate. The sultanate lasted some 257 years as an independent entity, and then actually continued existing under the Ottomans and even fought Napoleon. So pretty cool. They get 150 stability points because they were kind of always fighting each other, although at their peak in 1341, they ruled some 2 million square kilometers. Also, they get 70 cultural points because they saved Egypt and the rest of Africa from the Mongols. Also, they turned Egypt into a cultural powerhouse, which was the only prosperous state when the Black Death hit in 1348. Then we have the Safavids, the first gunpowder empire on this list. They ruled Iran for some 235
Yes,
years and
gunpowder.
pretty much
I
founded the
mentioned
modern
earlier
state
that
of
like
Iran.
I might have to have cannons, but I mean it kind of go it leads to the cannons, and they introduced that to the Islamic world. So all of it ties into it. That
Even though
helps
Iran
the
gets that
Ottomans
much
beat
longer. They want a
the
return to Iran being ruled by
Constantinople
Iranians after being
and
under
take
the
care of
Mongols
that.
and Central Asians for quite a while.
Um,
They were also responsible for converting Iran to Shiism, which is still the primary faith in Iran. They were the great rivals to the Ottomans. They get 175 stability points. At their peak in 1629, they ruled almost 3 million square kilometers. They get 70 cultural points because, like I mentioned, they converted Iran to Shiism and influenced its culture in a big way. Now, at number 7, we have the Rashidun Caliphate. A lot of people will be angry that I put them so low.
hold on, 7. I I thought they would be like 4 or top 5. He has them 7. Oh yeah, Allah. All right, this is comments are probably blaming him.
On the list, but the map speaks for itself. This was Islam's first caliphate and took hold right after the Prophet's death. They defeated the great Byzantine and Sasanian empires around them and are pretty much the reason Muslims exist anywhere in the world other than Arabia. Also, they canonized early Islam and put the Quran into its book form, so obviously they get full 100 cultural points. Although this caliphate existed for only 29 years, at its peak in 655, it controlled a remarkable 6.4 million square kilometers. It was also fairly stable and only spent the last 5 years in a civil war. At number 6, we have the Mughal Empire. It was one of the world's richest empires, and at its peak in 1689, it contributed almost 25% of the world's GDP. It also ruled over 4 million square kilometers. It existed as an independent entity for around 231 years and gets 150 points for stability because it actually had quite a few problems other than the sons of the emperors always fighting each other and their fathers. It gets 60 cultural points because it cemented Persian culture in India, and it was a Mughal emperor, Shah Jahan, who built the Taj Mahal. And even today, a lot of our laws and bureaucratic structures actually come from them. At number 5, we have the Fatimid Caliphate, the first and pretty much the last Shia Caliphate. They ruled Egypt and North Africa for some 262 years.
I was
They founded the
the
city of
leader.
Cairo, and most importantly,
Um,
they pretty much built the Shia faith.
weren't the
Also,
Fatimids the one that stopped they stopped the Mongols from invading, I believe, Egypt. I mean Africa too.
everything that the Shias believe today come from them, so they did for the Shias what the Abbasids did for the Sunnis. Hence, they get 90 cultural points. They also get 110 stability points because they became puppets in the last 100 or so years, and that didn't end well. At their peak in 969, they ruled some 4.1 million square kilometers. They had a fierce rivalry with the Sunni powers of the time and were actually the ones that lost Jerusalem to the Crusaders. Then we have the Delhi Sultanate, which has somehow beaten the Mughal Empire. I have no idea how. Stupid math. Delhi Sultanate existed for some 320 years. It was ruled by various dynasties, which made it pretty unstable with only 160 stability points, mainly because each dynasty pretty much only had one good conqueror who ruled for a while and then died, and then the dynasty collapsed. At their peak in 1351, they ruled almost all of India with 4 million square kilometers. For starting the conversion of Islam to India, they get 60 cultural points. They gave patronage to some of the most famous scholars and Sufi masters who slowly created what is now India's second largest religious group, the Indian Muslims. Okay, now we're in the final stretch, and the results, I guess, are kind of obvious. So let's get to number three, the Abbasid Caliphate. They came to power after defeating the Umayyads and ruled in two
Hmm.
different independent phases for around 297 years.
Obviously, the
They had
Basques
170 stability
would
points
be
because they
there.
started to decline after their peak in 861 when they
They
ruled.
like, I guess, were the at the forefront of like the science and like in inventions and stuff for the Islamic Empire, so they'd be there. So the Basques are
Some
this.
5 million square kilometers. They get full 100 cultural
The
points
Ottomans
because they
probably
ushered
number
in
one.
the
So
so-called golden age of Islam when science, literature, architecture, culture, everything was booming in the Islamic world. Also, it was during their reign that the jurisprudence of Islam, also known as Sharia, came together and the hadiths were compiled. Their fourth caliph, Harun al-Rashid, is perhaps the most famous Muslim ruler of all time. They actually stayed under the Buyids and the Seljuks for like 200 years before making a really good comeback, only to be destroyed by the Mongols in 1258. Then they lived in Cairo under the Mamluk Sultanate as nothing but figureheads, until they were displaced by the Ottomans in 1516. At number two is the second Umayyad Caliphate. A lot of people consider them to be a continuation of the first Umayyad Caliphate at Damascus, which was ruled by the Safyanid branch of the Umayyad dynasty, which ended in 684. After them, there
hmm
was a civil war, and then the second Umayyads came to power. These Umayyads are known as the Marwanids and were cousins to the Safyanids. The reason I consider them a different dynasty is because they were from a different branch of the Umayyads, and their style of government, their priorities, their achievements, and their legacy are all different than the Safyanids. Also, I recognize the caliphate of their rival, Abdullah ibn Zubayr, during that civil war. The
I
Marwanids
do
ruled
believe
for only
evidence
58
there.
years, out of which only around 32
Okay,
were fairly
cool.
stable.
So I
They
mean,
peaked
I
around
said they
728
would
when they
have
ruled a whopping
multiple
11
Umayyads
million
because
square
they
kilometers. Their empire stretched from
consider
Spain
them
to
to be
Sindh in
different
modern-day Pakistan. If you
Umayyads.
took a flight from Bogota, Colombia to New Delhi, India in 723, you'd spend 13 hours flying over Umayyad territory, and
Which is
you'd
crazy
probably also
that
be burned for doing
these
those.
Umayyads lost to the Abbasids. But
It is
anyway,
still one of the largest contiguous land empires ever. Also, they get 80 cultural points because they were the first Muslim empire to actually rule their empire. Previous two Islamic empires, the Sufyanid Umayyads and the Rashidun, hadn't really ruled. They had just conquered and taxed. It was the Marwanids who established a working form of government, and all subsequent Islamic empires followed some of their methods to rule. Finally, at number one is the Ottoman Empire. Now, they're kind of an obvious choice, so I wanted to avoid them, but by every reasonable standard, the Ottomans were the greatest Islamic empire. They were active for around 623 years, of which they spent a remarkable 400 or so in relative stability. This came partly because the rulers killed their brothers and partly because they had an amazing
okay.
administration.
So obviously, I said the Ottomans will be number one, which I mean isn't shocking to anyone at all. Uh, because of they ruled for 600 years, as it says here. But the Rashidun Caliphate by like every okay. So if you can give the Ottomans here, he has them at 400 stability points. The cultural influence for the Rashidun Caliphate should be like over 1,000. And that's why they should be number one because obviously like what came first, the chicken or the egg? We know what came first, and we know the none of the Islamic uh things that transpired after it starts about the Rashidun Caliphate. And they were the best of Muslims. And they had like it wasn't like a kingdom. It was like sure they were the Khalifas, but they were still, it wasn't like affected by doing it. We're like, oh, this is a king. You have to set up an appointment to go see him, um, and all this stuff. No, I come as I am. You can see me. You can see them walking the streets. Like it was obviously a different time, but they probably should have been number one. Number one for me is Russian Caliphate. There's no barrier. Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, I would set the best at first. That's actually not a bad thing. I'll be yeah. So uh, if you if you correctly guess number one, good for you. If you're mad about the Rashidun Caliphate not being number one, I mean, can't really be mad at it. He gave his reasons, his rationale, and the criteria for it beforehand. So that was his thoughts on the matter. And I will do a different video today, inshallah, as well. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.